The Pyromancer class in Outriders feels incredibly weak when you're first starting out because the only way you heal is by killing enemies that are burning, and you don't really have any way of mitigating incoming damage or killing enemies quickly enough to combo your skills together well. You've probably felt like this if you're playing in a group, or maybe even if you're playing solo. I know that I definitely did. Your starting skills sort of combo well together, but almost every story mission and side quest you do has enemies pretty spread out, which is easily the biggest weakness of the entire class. Pyromancer is super strong for AoE damage to tons of enemies, like probably even the best class in Outriders, but only when they're close together or in a straight line from you. All of this makes the Pyromancer feel really powerless compared to other classes in group content due to scaling. In a group of 3, I was always the one going down the most. My skills were always on cooldown, and I felt like my impact was just pretty much non-existent. The best part about this build is that you can unlock everything fairly early on. You don't need any specific weapons or armor, so whatever your best in slot is as you go is all you need. What you do need are just level 1 mods, which are extremely easy to get by dismantling gear you don't need. In this video, I'm going to go over the skills and mods you need for this build, and there's some extra tips to help you survive until endgame at the end of this video. If you're having trouble playing Pyromancer like I did, hit the like button on the video so I know to make more builds like this. So let's start with the skills you'll be using in the build, since you're pretty much just going to be using the same 3 abilities from the start of the game to the end. It's not that the other skills are bad, but I think that most of the skills in the Pyromancer's kit are brutally dependent on mods and gear that you're not going to get until you're in endgame, when you're at max level and can fully spec out a skill tree together. Feed the Flames is the first skill you need, and you just need to never ever take this off because it's as instant of a self heal on command you can get. With armor mods, we can get this heal to be pretty close to your entire health bar and on a rather short cooldown. With how badly you need heals early game, you need to be using this a lot. Volcanic Rounds is the next skill you'll be using, and it's probably the most busted skill and probably the strongest in the entire Pyromancer toolkit. It instantly fills your current weapon's mag with bullets and inflict burn on any enemy, even if the bullet misses. If the bullet hits, it does skill damage instead of using your firepower stat, and completely ignores armor, meaning it does direct damage to the enemy's health, making your weapon insane for single target damage to bosses or clearing away a spawn of enemies quickly. But the best thing about Volcanic Rounds is that the burn it applies. Enemies that die while inflicted with burn heal you, but enemies under burn are going to take massive damage by the 3rd skill in this build. Your 3rd skill is Overheat, which is an insane AoE skill on Pyromancer. The base range of the skill is so large that you'll be hitting enemies that you're not even fighting yet. By itself, it's extremely weak, but when an enemy is under the burn effect, they'll instantly take a massive amount of damage, and any action, movement, or ability they were trying to cast gets interrupted. Together, these 3 skills give you a ton of healing, big single target damage for bosses, and AoE damage to clear away enemies quickly so that you can heal even more. I switched to these about 15 to 20% of the way through the campaign, and it made a pretty lackluster experience I was having with the Pyromancer completely different. If you're short on time or want an ad-free experience, check out my Patreon from the description below, where you can watch all videos on the channel without a single ad, and videos are also condensed into only a few paragraphs to read. There's 5 armor slots on your character and 5 mods you need for this build. You want Wide Grip and Final Breath to make Feed the Flames better. Wide Grip lets you absorb from 1 more target, and Final Breath increases the amount you drain by 25%. Then you want Blacksmith and Sunburn, which buffs Overheat. Blacksmith makes so every status effect that gets consumed by Overheat gives you a ton of extra armor, and Sunburn does extra damage to those enemies. The amount of armor that you get and extra damage you deal are both based on your anomaly power that you have. And the Lost mod is called Extra Mag, which makes your Volcanic Rounds last for 2 magazines instead of just 1. If you have an LMG with 100 bullets in its mag, that means you get a 2nd mag once you reload. I cleared through a lot of enemies with the piercing Volcanic Rounds and was just constantly getting health back from all of the kills. The skill tree is pretty straightforward, focusing on the Firestorm tree with a little bit into Ashbreaker and Tempest. I'm just going to leave this on screen if you want to copy it real quick, but there's also a link below for you to use whenever. Basically, I stick to Firestorm because of the survivability it offers with increased health, armor, and resistances, and then the first 2 nodes in Ashbreaker and Tempest to get the reduced cooldown since this build uses all 3 skill types. For major nodes, Wildfire reduces all ability cooldowns by 10%. Extinction increases your damage by 20% against enemies below 30% health, which sounds kind of sleeper, but it's really good. I would have so many enemies burning, and then they would lose their burn status effect right before I killed them, reducing the amount of heals that I got. Bursting down those low health enemies under burn gets some really good healing for you, and can mean the difference between life or death when you get closer to endgame. Fuel for the Embers doubles your skill leech when below 30% health, which makes Feed the Flame self-heal for you even stronger. That's how you can easily get from below 30% health to basically full instantly. And then to make Volcanic Rounds on your gun even stronger, we're going to use Magma Elemental, which increases your armor and resistance piercing by 45% for 10 seconds. All you do is pop Volcanic Rounds on something like a high damage sniper rifle, and you'll do some massive single target DPS. It doesn't really matter what weapons you use, but I personally recommend a sniper rifle for huge single target damage, and anything that has a huge magazine size like an assault rifle. If you load Volcanic Rounds into the sniper, you'll do some extreme damage to a boss or elite with crit shots because you bypass their armor completely. If you have a weapon with a giant mag, you have more Volcanic Rounds and you can hit more enemies with burn. Just literally spray every enemy in the area with a bullet to inflict burn, or maybe a couple bullets to get them a little low first. Then pop Overheat and do your increased damage to each enemy inflicted with burn. If any of them die, you get your heals, but if not, you still get a massive damage to a ton of enemies. This build was literally a night and day difference for me. I went from having no healing to now being able to heal and tank a lot of incoming damage. My skills are now even stronger at AoE clearing the dozens of enemies in every fight, and enemies can be as grouped up or as far apart, and it really doesn't matter. Just keep using Feed the Flames whenever it's off cooldown and you need some insta heals. When Volcanic Rounds are up, get ready to do some massive damage to an individual enemy or a ton of damage to a large group of enemies when you follow up with Overheat. If Overheat is the only skill you have up, you can sprint a moment and then hit your melee to do an AoE attack that inflicts burn on a couple enemies where you land, then follow up with a supercharged Overheat. You should be able to use this build all the way until you get to endgame, and even into endgame content if you want to keep building this out. Comment down below if you have any tweaks to the build that you think would help with early game survivability, or if you have any tips to help everyone with the Pyromancer class. Thanks for watching.
If I could be a paradise.